Feedback is necessary for growth. You can't get better at something if you don't know what's working and what's not working. And feedback oftentimes is this like missing piece that can cultivate awareness, inspire learning, and really drive improvement. But I think we all want to be better coaches, but might avoid this one piece that could get us there, because feedback is really vulnerable and opens us up to criticism and judgment. And that is uncomfortable, but all growth is. And instead of avoiding it to stay comfortable, blissfully ignorant, or bypass potentially upsetting a client if you're giving feedback, let's talk about why feedback is absolutely worth the time, what it can create, and how to give and receive it. So let's first start with the why. So when I talk about feedback, by the way, I'm talking about constructive feedback, or as I like to call, feed forward in my coaching containers. This is when we're providing information for the sake of growth. We want to move people forward. And what it does is it helps us identify our strengths and our areas of improvement. It isn't just what we're doing wrong or what we're doing bad. It's also things that we can leverage to hit our goals and things that we might need to learn to get better. But feedback is one of the fastest ways to develop awareness around our blind spots and develop an informed plan to move forward to improve your performance, adjust approaches, or encourage new ideas and solutions. So obviously, with that being said, it can help people stay on track or get them back on track, but it can also open up communication. And when you have that type of transparent communication, it actually builds trust and respect in relationships. So oftentimes I hear people avoid feedback in relationships or in work settings or even in coaching containers because they fear it's going to rupture the relationship. They fear that it's going to cause some negativity between the two individuals, but actually the contrary. It can bring people closer together, and it can be motivating, and it can be affirming, especially when that feedback is positive, because not all feedback is bad. And when it's done skillfully, it's actually almost always helpful. So let's talk about how to give and receive feedback, starting with give. So the most common method of giving feedback is called the sandwich effect, which you're probably familiar with. It's usually known as the softer approach, but it's really, really easy. So all you do is you start off with sharing a strength, then you identify an area of improvement, and then you always end on another strength. So let me give you an example of what this might sound like. It might sound something like, hey, I appreciate your really hard work on this project, and we do need a little bit more detail on the budget before approving it, but this is a really creative idea and has a lot of potential. That's the sandwich method, okay? Strength, area of improvement, end on a strength, okay? Now, another method is called the SBI method. This one I really like for coaching in particular because it's clear and it focuses on specific actions, which a lot of coaching is action-oriented, it's solution-focused, and what this particular method does is helps avoid generalizations and makes the feedback more actionable. So here's what you want to do. So S stands for situation, B stands for behavior, and I stands for impact. SBI. So situation is you want to describe the specific context in which the behavior occurred. Okay, you want to be clear about when and where it happened so the person can pinpoint the exact circumstance you're talking about. Then you want to describe the behavior and you want to focus on what the person actually did. What are the observable actions, okay? Not assumptions about their intentions or their thoughts or the reason they did something or the person's character. You want to avoid defensiveness here by focusing on the behavior. Then you want to talk about the impact. So you want to explain the effect that that person's behavior had on you, had on the team, had on the project, had on their goals. So let me give you an example of what this might sound like. So, hey, Jane, during group coaching this morning, you interrupted a couple peers while it was their turn to get coaching. And this caused a little bit of frustration and made it harder for people to feel comfortable volunteering to share during the group coaching call. Now, here's what I will say. That is the SBI method. I personally would add an R to this model, which stands for request, and I would utilize that as an opportunity to offer a suggestion that would be helpful or something specific that would move the situation or the person forward, or posing a question that leads the discussion in that direction. Because I think that it leaves it a little too open-ended, and I want to get the conversation moving in that direction. So what I might do to the SBI method is just add, so during next week's group coaching call, can you utilize the chat function to encourage your peers or ask any questions that come up while other people are speaking? And then just allow that to kind of facilitate the discussion moving forward. But here are just a couple tips in general to really help you give feedback in a way that's going to facilitate growth versus come off critical and increase defensiveness. So we already talked about this, but make sure you're very specific. So you want to avoid vague statements that kind of make it feel like a personal attack. Focus on concrete examples and on specific behaviors. You want to be timely as well. You want to offer feedback as soon as possible. Don't let it linger and be like, oh, 6 months ago when you did this one thing. Try to be as close to the situation as possible so that it's relevant. You want to use a neutral tone as well. So we don't want to be critical to really lower defensiveness here. And kind of like what we talked about with the SBI method, you want to be constructive. If it's appropriate, offer some actionable suggestions for improvement, offer support. And another thing is encourage two-way communication. Give the recipient of the feedback a chance to discuss their thoughts or their reactions or their feelings, or ask questions about the feedback, or ask for support in implementing any of those changes. I personally make feedback a staple in my coaching. I do this in a few ways, but number one, I make sure that I have periodic two-way evaluations. Meaning I evaluate the client, I give them feedback, and I encourage them to talk to me and give me feedback. I want them to know that we are both here for the same purpose, and I'm going to do whatever it takes to help them hit their goals as well. It's a great way to have mutual accountability and help the client feel empowered to take responsibility for their coaching. And in terms of what this might look like, this is about halfway through, or at least during the wrap up, I'll either save a few minutes at the beginning or end of the call to check in and ask them specifically what's working and what's not working, maybe what they've learned thus far, or what approach is resonating the best with them, or just check in where we are in terms of our process and our goals, and if we need to pivot in any way or change up our approach. And inside of my coach certification program, the Art and Skill of Coaching, I actually have standardized forms that we do halfway through and towards the end of the program to ensure that anything that's not being addressed in the program or anything that's falling short, we have time to address. And with one-on-one clients, I like to ask for feedback about every 30 days because feedback works best when it's relevant and it's timely and it's reciprocal. So I let them know that I'm not just here to tell them what to do, but that they also have a seat at the table and that they can inform me what's working best for them. This is a mutual opportunity for us to learn and grow together, and I utilize the feedback to not only improve my coaching, but improve my programs as well. So in terms of receiving feedback, you can utilize those forms or those structured conversations that I just offered, both one-on-one or in group spaces. But when you receive that feedback as a coach, you also want to listen openly and be willing to implement it. It does not mean that you have to accept all the feedback, as is true with your clients, but I do read all of the forums and I do take notes during that conversation. And when my client says something, I'll ask follow-up questions to gather more information, and I'll go back later and really pinpoint what are my strengths that I want to continue leveraging and what feedback is relevant and valuable in terms of improving my coaching or my programs. And then I'll make a plan to learn that skill or bridge that gap or implement that information, whether it's immediately with a particular client or for the next round of the Art and Skill of Coaching. I view feedback as a gift. They are giving my product, which is my coaching, an honest review. And I use that information to keep making the product better. And that feedback is so valuable when it comes directly from the client because they're the ones experiencing the product firsthand. So you want to create opportunities for feedback inside of your coaching containers. It's mutually beneficial for both the client and the coach. And it can look so many different ways, but the results are so worth it. There's increased awareness on both parties, boosted confidence, an enhanced relationship, and when done skillfully can really facilitate and increase motivation to improve and eventually make progress, which is the goal of great coaching. So this week, I encourage you to implement what you're learning, obviously with permission if you are offering feedback, but really try to seek out this conversation and extract the value from it and see how it can be helpful for you and for the other individual. I hope you found these tips on how to give and receive feedback valuable. And if there are any other things that you want to learn on this YouTube channel, go ahead and throw those in the comments. I read them. I would love to interact with you and record something special that's really going to help you improve and continue to up-level your coaching skill set. And make sure you hit the subscribe button. That way you never miss a video from us, and check out some of our other teachings to just keep adding those tools to your coaching toolbox.